Dr. Iris Thorne had just started at the St. Jude Psychiatric Hospital, a grim, brutalist edifice that looked less like a place of healing and more like a mausoleum. A kind of place where sunlight felt like an intrusion. A week into his new job, he was given his first archival case. Just to get you acquainted with the system, his supervisor, Dr. Alistair Finch, had said, handing him a dusty manila folder. Patient 734 died over 5 years ago. Just file it away properly. The folder felt heavy in his hands, not with weight, but with a palpable sense of finality. Inside, the documents were yellowed and brittle. The patient's name was Elias Vance. The notes were sparse. Diagnosed with acute dissociative identity disorder, complicated by severe paranoia. He had been a brilliant cartographer, obsessed with charting spaces that didn't exist, dreamscapes, memory palaces, impossible labyrinths. He'd died by suicide, a brief, sterile entry at the end of the file. That night, alone in his apartment, Aris decided to start the grunt work. He opened the file again, intending to digitize the sparse notes. He keyed in the first entries, a monotonous task, the details of Vance's intake and initial assessment. He worked until his eyes were tired, then closed the file and left it on his desk. The thick moonlight cutting a silver rectangle across the papers. He woke up to the sound of his laptop fan. It was still on. He stretched, walked over to the desk, and glanced at the file. A fresh, stark white sheet of paper had been added to the top of the stack. He hadn't put it there. His heart gave a little jolt. He picked it up. The handwriting was a precise, elegant script, unlike the hurried scrawl of the original notes. Day 1. The doctor's new apartment is a good space, clean but with a lonely echo. He prefers coffee black. His coat hangs on the back of the door, a little crooked. The key is to notice the details. They are the markers of a map. Aris felt a cold wave of nausea. He looked around the room. His coat was indeed crooked on the hook. The laptop was still on. The coffee cup he'd used last night sat on the desk. He hadn't told anyone where he lived, not even his family. How could anyone know these things? He told himself it was a prank. An elaborate, deeply unsettling prank by one of the older doctors testing the rookie. He shoved the new page back into the file, tucked the folder into a locked drawer in his desk, and went to work, his mind a whirlwind of doubt and rising fear. He told himself it was a stress reaction, an anxiety-induced delusion, but the cold dread lingered. The next day, the file was just as he'd left it, nothing new. He spent the day trying to focus, but his mind kept returning to the chilling precision of the notes. He thought about confronting Dr. Finch, but what would he say? A dead patient's file is writing about my life? It sounded insane. He was a psychiatrist. He knew what that sounded like. He went home, and a strange compulsion took hold of him. He felt an intense need to check the file. He unlocked the drawer, pulled out the folder, and opened it. Another page. This one had the date, handwritten just like the first. Day 2. The doctor saw a child on the way to work wearing a yellow raincoat. He thought of his sister, a memory he hasn't visited in years. The thought was a wrong turn on the map, a path to a place he does not want to go. I must correct the route. The map is incomplete without the landmarks of fear. Uris's breath caught in his throat. He had in fact seen a child in a yellow raincoat that morning. It was a fleeting, unremarkable moment, but the part about his sister, it was true. He hadn't thought about her in a long time, not since she'd left for the Peace Corps and their relationship had soured. He was being watched, not just his actions, but his thoughts. He felt the walls of his apartment closing in, the comfortable space turning into a cell. He began to search through the old notes in the file, his hands shaking. He read through every line of Elias Vance's history, looking for clues, for a secret message, for anything that could explain this impossible violation. He found a detail buried in a progress report from an old, now retired doctor. Vance had a peculiar habit. He would draw maps on the back of old reports, not of places, but of emotions, of people's lives. He called them psychological terrains. A shiver ran down Orissa's spine. This was it. This was the connection. Vance hadn't been charting physical spaces. He'd been mapping the human mind. His mind. The file was the terrain. The notes were the landmarks. And he, Aris, was the traveler, walking along a path laid out by a dead man. He didn't sleep that night. He sat up, the file open on his desk, his eyes fixed on the blank space where the next page would appear. The silence in the room was a deafening roar. He waited for the rustle of paper, the whisper of ink. He waited for a ghost to write his future. And sure enough, just before dawn, as the first gray light filtered through his window, a new page materialized. Day 3. The doctor is awake all night, a good choice. The mind is most receptive in the liminal spaces between sleep and wakefulness. He is thinking about the file, about me. He believes I am a metaphor. He is wrong. I am the map maker. The route is narrowing now. The destination is in sight. The last line was a chilling, stark sentence, a statement of intent. The destination is in sight. Aris was no longer just the subject of a creepy prank. He was a piece on a chessboard. He had to stop this. He had to sever the connection. He had to destroy the file. He ran to the incinerator chute in the hospital basement, the thick folder clutched in his hands. The air was cold and smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant. He slid open the heavy metal door. A blast of hot air rushed out, smelling of scorched paper. He paused. He thought of the file, of Elias Vance. What if this was not malice? What if it was a desperate plea? A soul trapped in the notes, trying to communicate? What if destroying the file meant destroying a part of himself? His hands trembled, unable to let go. He closed the door, the metal groaning like a sigh, and went back to his office. He couldn't burn it. Not yet. He had to understand it first. For the next week, he lived in a state of hyper-awareness. He was a man walking a tightrope over an abyss. He had to be careful what he did, what he thought. The pages continued to appear, each one a new journal entry, each one a new, terrifyingly accurate account of his life. Day 4. He avoided the red car in the intersection. A small detail, but a deviation from the map. It was not a planned detour. A map maker must account for all possible errors. The terrain is getting rough. Day 5. He spoke to Dr. Finch about his concerns, but did not mention the file. A lie of omission, a tangled path. The map grows complex, but the destination remains unchanged. Day 6. He's thinking of calling his sister, an unexpected landmark. She is a dead end. I must cut her out of the map. He will not speak to her. He tried to call his sister. The phone rang once, twice, and then the line went dead. He tried again. The number was disconnected. He tried to search her name online. No results. It was as if she had been erased from existence. A small, chilling voice in his head said, I am the map maker, and I am redrawing your reality. The fear turned to rage. He wasn't going to be a pawn in some dead man's game. He went to the hospital library, a cavernous space filled with books bound in leather. He searched for Elias Vance's file. The records were old in the hospital's original handwritten ledger. He found the entry for patient 734. The name was indeed Elias Vance. He had been a patient for 3 years. But something else was written in a cramped, almost illegible hand on the side. Transferred to Ward B for experimental treatment. Aris knew there was no Ward B at St. Jude. The hospital had never had a Ward B. It was another lie, another red herring. He found the original doctor's file, Dr. Finch's predecessor. Dr. Finch was a young, brilliant intern at the time of Vance's death. Aris read through Dr. Finch's notes. Finch had been obsessed with Elias Vance. He had seen Vance as a genius, not a madman. His notes spoke of a conscious cartography, a way to map and manipulate reality through the patient's mind. The notes were full of diagrams, complex and fractal, maps of a non-existent space. It was a theoretical project, something so far out there that it had been dismissed by the hospital board. Aris now saw the whole picture with a sickening clarity. He wasn't the victim of a ghost. He was the subject of an experiment. Finch had taken Vance's research, his map-making, and used it on Aris. The file wasn't updating itself. Finch was doing it meticulously every night, feeding Aris's life into a system that was slowly, methodically erasing the landmarks that made him who he was. The sister, the red car, these weren't accidents. They were deliberate removals from his life, orchestrated by Finch, who was manipulating him, pushing him along a predetermined path. The fear, the paranoia, the self-doubt, they were all part of the process, designed to make him vulnerable, to make him the perfect subject. He went back to his office, his mind a still trap of cold fury. He was going to expose Finch. He was going to take the file and his own life story to the board, to the police, to anyone who would listen. He was going to prove that Finch was a monster, a man who had murdered a patient and was now trying to drive a new one to madness. He opened his desk drawer. The file was gone. The drawer was empty. A single note lay on the felt lining. The map maker is always one step ahead. The destination is in sight. And it is not a happy place. It is a lonely place. The place where the map ends. Aris felt a sudden deep emptiness. He was alone. His sister was gone. The file, his only proof, was gone. He had nowhere to turn. He walked out of his office, through the deserted halls of the hospital, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like trapped flies. He felt a profound sense of isolation, a chilling emptiness that was more terrifying than any ghost. He was walking along a path, and he had no say in where it led. He was a passenger in his own life. He walked past the hospital's morgue. The door was slightly ajar. A single weak light filtered out. He paused, a strange pull drawing him towards it. He pushed the door open, the hinges squeaking. He saw a gurney in the center of the room. On it, a body covered by a white sheet. A name tag was attached to the sheet. He walked over, his legs heavy. He picked up the tag. The name was Eris Thorne. Patient 734. The notes on the tag, in Dr. Finch's familiar scrawl, read, diagnosed with acute dissociative identity disorder, severe paranoia, believed he was a psychiatrist. The cause of death was listed as suicide. The date was 5 years ago. Aris looked at his hands. They were translucent, shimmering slightly in the cold, antiseptic air. He was a ghost. He was the patient who had died years ago. He was Elias Vance, and he was trapped in his own head, in a memory palace created by a man who had manipulated him until he no longer knew what was real. Dr. Finch hadn't been manipulating Eris Thorne. He had been documenting Elias Vance's final, desperate delusion, a life he had never lived, a family that had never existed, a career that had never been his own. The file wasn't updating with Aris's life. It was Vance's fragmented mind rewriting his own history, trying to create a coherent narrative out of the debris of his madness. The last page appeared on the gurney, right next to the toe tag, a clean white sheet, the final entry. The destination is reached. The map is complete. It ends here. And now the doctor will become a file. The coppery smell of blood filled the room. Aris felt a searing pain in his wrist, and he saw his own hand, holding a scalpel from a surgical tray, a thin red line appearing on his skin. He dropped the scalpel, but the other hand, his hand, picked it back up. He was no longer in control. He was an observer in his own body. He was the patient in the final note. The last patient. The final entry in a file that had never been about him. It had always been about the man who held the pen.